I hear Faith going, no, Daddy, please, Daddy, don't do it. Daddy, please don't do it.
5 o'clock, though, the state of Texas is about an hour away now from executing one of Dallas's most notorious killers.
John List.
Many of you watched tonight's CBS movie Judgment Day, the John List story. It was about the New Jersey accountant who slaughtered his entire family.
You ever heard of a monster that looked like your neighbor's dad? Like a guy who'd do your taxes or teach Sunday school? That was John Emil List, an accountant, a church-going family man, and one of America's most methodical killers. In November 1971, this 46-year-old New Jersey accountant did the unthinkable.
Something like that had never happened here before. That kind of mass murders. I mean, single murders are rare. No matter, a whole family wiped out.
After losing his job and facing financial ruin, List made a decision that still chills the blood of anyone who hears it. Rather than face the humiliation of bankruptcy and welfare, he methodically executed his entire family in their 19-room Westfield mansion. One by one, he shot his wife, Helen, his mother, Alma, and his 3 children, Patricia, 16, Frederick, 13, and John Jr., 15. The precision of it all is what gets to you. List shot his wife and mother in the morning, then calmly waited for his children to return from school before killing them too. After the murders, he arranged the bodies on sleeping bags in the ballroom, except for his mother, whom he left in her attic apartment. Then get this. He turned on religious music to play throughout the empty house, cut his face out of every family photograph, and wrote a 5-page confession letter to his pastor. In it, he claimed he was saving his family from the embarrassment of financial failure and sending them to heaven. The most bone-chilling part? After committing these murders, List disappeared, not for days or weeks, for 18 years. He moved to Colorado, changed his name to Robert Clark, remarried, and lived a completely normal suburban life. The bodies weren't discovered until almost a month after the murders, when neighbors noticed lights burning out one by one in the mansion. List was finally caught in 1989 when his case was featured on America's Most Wanted. A forensic sculptor had created an age-progressed bust showing what List might look like after all those years. A woman recognized her neighbor, her husband's former Sunday school teacher, and called the police. When asked about his family in a prison interview years later, List had the audacity to say, "I'm sure that if we recognize each other in heaven, we'll like each other's company just as we did here when times were better." He died in prison in 2008, denying his family not just their lives, but any semblance of justice for nearly 2 decades. The calculating nature of his crime and his ability to live a double life make John List one of the most terrifying family killers in American history. John Battaglia.
Say I'm ready to be executed. I mean, I don't want to be.
John Battaglia was executed just moments ago after the U.S. Supreme Court denied several last-ditch appeals.
Some men kill in cold blood. Some kill in the heat of passion. But John Battaglia? He killed to inflict the maximum amount of pain possible. Not on his victims, but on his ex-wife who had to listen to it all happen.
Then I hear Faith going, no, Daddy, please, Daddy, don't do it. Daddy, please don't do it.
In May 2001, this Dallas accountant was supposed to be having dinner with his daughters, 9-year-old Faith and 6-year-old Liberty. Instead, he took them to his Deep Ellum apartment with murder on his mind. Battaglia was angry at his ex-wife, Mary Jean Pearl, for reporting his harassment to the police. With a warrant out for his arrest, he decided the ultimate revenge wasn't hurting her directly. It was taking away what she loved most. What happened next is almost too cruel to describe. Battaglia called Pearl and put his daughter Faith on the phone. "Mommy, why do you want Daddy to go to jail?" the little girl asked. Then Pearl heard the unthinkable, her daughter's voice changing to terror. "No, Daddy, please don't do it." Gunshots rang out. Pearl screamed into the phone for her daughters to run.
So we circled around and I said, oh, there he is. Hold up.
Instead, she heard more gunshots. Before hanging up, Battaglia delivered his final blow. "Merry fucking Christmas," he said, a reference to a previous Christmas when he had assaulted Pearl. Police found Faith shot 3 times and Liberty shot 5 times. Battaglia had left a message on the answering machine in the girl's bedroom. "Good night, my little babies." The brutality doesn't end there. At his execution in February 2018, Battaglia remained remorseless to the end. His last words? A taunt to his ex-wife who was watching behind glass. "Well, hi, Mary Jean. I'll see y'all later. Bye." As the lethal injection began, he looked up and asked, "Am I still alive?" Then he smiled.
And I said, run for the door, run for the door.
What kind of man uses his own children as pawns in a sick game of revenge? What kind of father makes his child's last moments a phone call where she begs for her life? That's the special kind of evil John Battaglia brought to this world, and the reason why, despite claims of mental illness, few mourned when the state of Texas finally put him down. Andre Thomas.
Attorneys for a North Texas death row inmate who removed his only eye and ate it several years ago are arguing to a federal appeals court that he's too mentally ill to be executed.
If there's a case that forces us to ask the hardest questions about mental illness, justice, and the death penalty, it's Andre Thomas. His story is less about evil and more about a mind so broken that reality ceased to exist, long before he committed his crimes. In March 2004, this 21-year-old from Sherman, Texas, killed his estranged wife, Laura Boren, their 4-year-old son, Andre Jr., and her 13-month-old daughter, Leha. But the manner of the killing suggests a mind completely unhinged. Thomas stabbed each victim with a different knife to keep their blood separate and cut out the hearts of both children, putting them in his pocket before leaving. After the murders, Thomas walked into the Sherman Police Department and confessed. He told officers God had instructed him to kill his family, believing his wife was Jezebel and his son was the Antichrist. If that wasn't disturbing enough, 5 days after his arrest, Thomas gouged out his right eye with his bare hands while in his jail cell. He had been reading the Bible and took Matthew 5:29 literally. "If thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out." Years later in prison, he removed his left eye and ate it to prevent the government from reading his thoughts. The question hanging over this case isn't whether Thomas committed these horrible acts. He freely admitted it. The question is whether he was sane enough to be held responsible for them. Despite his obvious and severe mental illness, he'd been hearing voices since age 9, a jury rejected his insanity defense in 2005 and sentenced him to death.
When a North Texas jury in 2005 convicted him of killing his estranged wife's 13-month-old daughter.
Texas courts acknowledged Thomas was clearly crazy, but still sane under Texas law, a distinction that shows the gap between medical reality and legal definitions. As of today, Thomas sits blind in a psychiatric prison unit, heavily medicated for schizophrenia, with an execution that's been delayed as courts weigh whether he's competent to be put to death. His lawyers have filed for clemency, arguing that executing a man so obviously mentally ill serves no purpose of justice. Meanwhile, mental health advocates point to Thomas's case as proof that our system fails the severely mentally ill long before they commit crimes. Thomas sought help the day before the murders, but was left alone in a hospital waiting room until he walked out. Is Andre Thomas an evil man who deserves death, or a profoundly sick one who never received the help he needed? That's the uncomfortable question his case forces us to answer. Chris Watts.
Chris Watts. And right now it's just like they've been on point. They're going through the house trying to get a scent, and hopefully they can pick something up to where it's going to lead to something.
I can't imagine what you're going through right now.
The house, I couldn't sleep at all last night.
Look at his face, that goddamn smile. That's what gets you about Chris Watts. How normal he seemed. How completely, utterly average. In August of 2018, this 33-year-old Colorado dad murdered his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their two adorable little girls, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste. And then, get this, he went on TV the next day with those puppy dog eyes, pleading for their safe return.
On units, the sheriff's department, everybody's like they're doing their best right now to figure out like if they can get us sent.
The audacity of this guy standing in front of cameras, acting worried sick while his family lay dead by his own hands.
I couldn't sleep at all last night.
What kind of monster does that? Truth is, beneath that all-American facade, Watts was having an affair with a co-worker. When Shanann confronted him about wanting a separation, something inside him snapped. He strangled his pregnant wife, who was carrying their unborn son they planned to name Nico, then smothered his daughters one by one. Can you imagine looking into your child's eyes while you take their life? This man did that. Twice. After the killings, Watts didn't just crack a beer and call it a day. No, he loaded their bodies into his work truck and drove them to an oil field where he worked. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave and stuffed his daughters' bodies into crude oil tanks. Let that sink in. He stuffed his babies into oil tanks to dispose of them. When police got suspicious of his story, Watts first tried claiming Shanann killed the girls after he asked for separation, and he killed her in a rage. Nobody bought it. Eventually, he confessed to everything. In November 2018, Watts pleaded guilty to 9 charges to avoid the death penalty. The family of his victims supported this decision. He's now serving 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole in a Wisconsin prison. Every time you look at those family photos with him smiling next to his beautiful wife and daughters, remember, sometimes the most dangerous monsters wear the mask of normalcy. That's what makes Watts so damn terrifying. He could be your neighbor, your coworker, your friend, until one day he's not. Scott Peterson.
This morning, 2 decades after going to prison for the murder of his pregnant wife, Lacey, Scott Peterson is breaking his silence.
Christmas Eve ought to be about presents and family gatherings, but in 2002, it became the backdrop for one of America's most notorious family murders. Scott Peterson, 30 years old, reported his 8 months pregnant wife, Lacey, missing from their Modesto, California home on December 24th. "I just came home from fishing and she wasn't here," he told the cops, putting on his best worried husband act. But this pretty boy with the charming smile was living a double life. While playing the devoted husband to Lacey, who was carrying their unborn son they planned to name Connor, he was actively pursuing a relationship with massage therapist Amber Frey. The kicker? He told Frey his wife was already dead. For months, the case captivated America. Then in April 2003, the bodies of Lacey and her unborn son washed ashore in San Francisco Bay, right where Peterson claimed he'd been fishing that Christmas Eve. Coincidence? The jury didn't think so. The evidence against Peterson wasn't overwhelming, but his behavior was damning. He dyed his hair blonde and was arrested near the Mexican border with $15,000 cash, 4 cell phones, and his brother's ID. Not exactly the actions of an innocent grieving husband, right? In 2004, a jury found him guilty of first-degree murder for Lacey's death and second-degree murder for their unborn son. He was sentenced to death, a punishment that was later overturned in 2020 due to jury selection issues. Today, Peterson sits in Mule Creek State Prison, serving life without parole. Here's the thing that'll mess with your head. To this day, Peterson maintains his innocence.
I could say I was stronger, but all that stuff did take a toll on me.
In January 2024, the Los Angeles Innocence Project took up his case, seeking new evidence and DNA testing. Could they be right? Most don't think so, but this case shows how justice sometimes isn't as clear-cut as we'd like it to be. One look at the photos of Lacey, beautiful, radiant, excited to become a mother, and you can't help but feel the rage. Whatever his reasons, whatever drove him to it, Scott Peterson robbed his wife and son of their futures. That's something no legal maneuvering can ever undo. Ronald Gene Simmons.
In Arkansas, investigators continue to look into one of the nation's worst cases of mass murder.
If you think family gatherings are stressful, you haven't heard about Ronald Gene Simmons. This former military man holds the gruesome distinction of committing the worst family mass murder in American history. In December 1987, this 47-year-old retired Air Force Master Sergeant embarked on a killing spree that would leave 16 people dead, 14 of them his own flesh and blood. Simmons lived with his family on a 13-acre compound locals called Mockingbird Hill near Dover, Arkansas. The property was surrounded by a makeshift 10-foot privacy fence, no telephone, no indoor plumbing. Red flags, anyone? The nightmare began December 22nd, when Simmons bludgeoned and shot his wife, Rebecca, and visiting son, Ronald Gene Jr. Over the next 4 days, he strangled or shot his remaining children and grandchildren as they either lived in or visited the home. The victims ranged from 29 years down to a 20th-month-old grandson. After murdering his entire family, what did Simmons do? He arranged their bodies in neat rows in the lounge, covering most with coats. Then he went to a local bar, had a drink, and spent the next day and a half watching TV and drinking beer. Cold as ice. But Simmons wasn't done. On December 28th, he drove to Russellville, killed 2 former co-workers, and wounded 4 others before surrendering to police. When authorities searched his home, they discovered the house of horrors he'd left behind. Why'd he do it? No one knows for sure. Some say his wife was planning to leave him. Others point to evidence of sexual abuse within the family. Simmons never offered an explanation. Here's where it gets even more twisted. Simmons refused to appeal his death sentence. To those who oppose the death penalty, in my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment, he reportedly said. This guy actually wanted to die. On June 25, 1990, Simmons got his wish. Arkansas executed him by lethal injection, the quickest sentence to execution timeline in modern American history. His final words? Justice delayed finally being done is justifiable homicide. No family members claimed his body. He was buried in a pauper's grave, leaving behind a legacy of horror that still haunts Arkansas to this day. Darlie Routier.
I swear I did not murder my children, I swear.
Imagine this. A 26-year-old mother sits in a hospital room with a slashed throat and stab wounds to her arms. She's just survived a brutal attack, but her 2 young sons weren't so lucky. 5-year-old Damon and 6-year-old Devin have been stabbed to death in their own home. This is Darlie Routier's story, or at least her version of it. According to Darlie, an intruder broke into their upscale Rowlett, Texas home on June 6, 1996, attacked her and her boys, then fled. Her husband Darren and infant son Drake slept upstairs, untouched. But police weren't buying it. 8 days after the murders, they arrested Darlie herself. The evidence against her? A bizarre videotape of Darlie spraying silly string and laughing at her son's graves on what would have been Devin's 7th birthday, just days after their murders. There was also a suspicious lack of blood on the couch where she claimed to have slept, a kitchen sink with evidence of cleanup, and inconsistencies in her story. Prosecutors painted Darlie as a materialistic woman, frustrated with motherhood and facing financial problems. They claimed she staged the break-in after killing her sons, even inflicting wounds on herself. In February 1997, a jury found her guilty of killing 5-year-old Damon. She was sentenced to death and has been sitting on Texas death row ever since, over 25 years now. Here's where it gets complicated. Darlie has maintained her innocence from day one.
Darlie, do you have any comments? Is there anything you would like to say? I didn't murder my children.
Her supporters point to unidentified fingerprints found at the scene, questionable handling of evidence, and potential tunnel vision by investigators. They believe she's an innocent mother being punished twice, first by losing her children, then by being blamed for it. The case continues to divide people. Could a mother really brutally stab her children over financial stress? Or did Texas send an innocent, grieving mother to death row based on circumstantial evidence and a silly string video? Darlie Routhier's fate remains uncertain as appeals continue to wind through the courts. Meanwhile, she waits on death row, either a cold-blooded child killer or one of the most tragic victims of a justice system gone wrong. You decide. What drives a man to wipe out his entire family? It's the question that haunts every one of these cases, the thing we desperately want to understand. The truth is, there's no single answer. These men, these family annihilators, carry different demons. But experts have noticed patterns that might shed light on this darkest of crimes. Most family annihilators are men in their 30s or 40s. They often choose weekends to commit their crimes when the family is gathered together. The catalyst? Usually one of four things: a perceived failure as a provider, the loss of control over the family unit, revenge against a partner, or severe mental illness. Take John List, who in 1971 killed his wife, mother, and 3 children in their New Jersey home. His motive? Financial problems and the fear of his family abandoning their religious values. List left the bodies neatly arranged, canceled the milk delivery, and disappeared for 18 years before being caught. Or consider Jeffrey McDonald, the Green Beret doctor who claimed hippie intruders killed his pregnant wife and 2 daughters in 1970. Evidence suggested McDonald himself committed the murders, staging the scene to look like the Manson family crimes that had recently shocked the nation. He's still serving 3 life sentences, still claiming innocence. The common thread? Control. When these men feel their grip on their families slipping, whether through financial problems, impending divorce, or other crises, some make the unthinkable decision that if they can't have their family, no one can. What makes these crimes particularly chilling is their betrayal of the most fundamental human bond. The family home should be a sanctuary. Parents should protect their children at all costs. When that sacred trust is violated in the most violent way possible, it shakes our collective sense of safety to the core. And there's something else that sets family annihilators apart from other killers. Many don't try to escape justice. Some, like Simmons, even welcome it. Others, like Watts, initially try to maintain their innocence before the weight of evidence crushes their facade. Are these men monsters? Absolutely.